The night my daughter-in-law ordered my own son to remove me from her celebration like I was an unwanted stranger. She had no idea that the company paying for her success had quietly grown because of investments I had made years before. And she certainly did not realize that the elderly woman she dismissed had spent decades building a fortune while choosing to live a life that looked completely ordinary. I quietly placed my untouched drink on the kitchen counter, smiled without saying another word, walked into the cool evening air, and by sunrise, I had already decided that the truth would finally step out of the shadows, where I had hidden it for nearly 30 years. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old, and I lost my husband, Richard, almost 2 decades ago after we spent most of our marriage turning forgotten properties into thriving businesses that eventually supported hundreds of families across several states. We never cared about expensive cars or magazine-worthy mansions because we believed wealth should create security instead of attention. So after Richard passed away, I continued running everything quietly while allowing the world to believe I was simply a retired widow living a peaceful and uncomplicated life. Long before my only son Nathan learned to ride a bicycle, Richard and I promised each other that money would never become the center of his identity. Because we had watched relatives destroy lifelong relationships over inheritances and easy success, we raised him in a comfortable but modest neighborhood outside Louisville, packed homemade lunches for school, encouraged him to earn every achievement through hard work, and never allowed him to suspect that the small investment company we owned had slowly become one of the largest private real estate groups in the region. Nathan accepted weekend jobs during high school, paid for part of his first car with money he earned himself, and later attended law school, believing student loans and scholarship were the only reason he could afford his education. While I quietly erased every remaining balance after graduation without ever telling him, watching him celebrate accomplishments he believed were entirely his own filled me with pride because I wanted confidence built on character rather than privilege, even if it meant carrying a secret that grew heavier every passing year. Everything changed when Nathan introduced me to the woman who would later become his wife, a brilliant young attorney named Vanessa Brooks whose intelligence impressed everyone she met, but whose first glance at people often became her final judgment before they had spoken more than a few words. During our very first family dinner, she politely admired my modest home, my old furniture, and my simple wardrobe. Yet I could almost hear the silent conclusions forming behind her smile as she decided I was nothing more than an aging mother with an ordinary life and very little to offer beyond warm meals and quiet conversations. Nathan and Vanessa married less than 2 years later, and although I welcomed her into our family with genuine kindness, I slowly realized that every visit carried an invisible distance because she treated me with polite courtesy instead of sincere respect, as though I belonged to a different world that no longer mattered. I ignored the subtle remarks and forced smiles because I loved my son deeply. And when their beautiful daughter Lily was born, I promised myself that no disagreements would ever come between me and the little girl whose laughter brightened every corner of my heart. About 3 years after their wedding, Nathan called me one quiet Sunday afternoon and explained that he and Vanessa had found their dream home, overlooking a peaceful lake outside Nashville. But the down payment was larger than they could comfortably afford, despite years of careful saving. He never directly asked me for financial help because he had been raised to stand on his own. Yet, I heard the hesitation in his voice and offered to provide $100,000 through a private family agreement, while asking him to tell Vanessa it was a temporary loan rather than an outright gift. Nathan thanked me so sincerely that his voice trembled with emotion, but when he repeated the news to Vanessa on speakerphone, I noticed her surprised silence before she finally responded with a doubtful tone that suggested she could not imagine someone like me possessing that amount of money. That brief reaction stayed with me long after the call ended because it revealed that she had already created a complete picture of my life without ever asking a single meaningful question about the years I had lived before becoming her mother-in-law. Once they settled into their beautiful new house, Vanessa gradually became more confident in the role she believed I occupied, and she began speaking to me with the slow, overly patient voice people often use when they assume someone is fragile or incapable of understanding modern life. At restaurants, she answered questions before I could speak for myself, introduced me to friends as Nathan's adorable old-fashioned mother, and laughed gently whenever I mentioned ideas about business or investing, never realizing that I had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts long before she entered law school. During those same years, Vanessa dedicated nearly every waking hour to earning a partnership at one of the most respected corporate law firms in Tennessee, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and countless evenings because she believed that promotion would finally prove she had reached the highest level of professional success. I genuinely admired her determination and celebrated every milestone she achieved, yet she remained completely unaware that one of the silent investors whose approval carried enormous influence over the firm's future decisions was none other than the woman she still believed lived a quiet and insignificant life. Several years before Vanessa ever joined that prestigious law firm, I had quietly purchased a substantial ownership interest through one of my private investment companies after one of the founding partners unexpectedly decided to retire and sell his shares during a difficult financial period. I never attended meetings, never appeared at company events, and never placed my name in public records connected to the investment, choosing instead to let experienced executives manage the business, while I remained nothing more than an anonymous investor whose signature occasionally approved major decisions. One rainy Tuesday morning, my longtime attorney, Margaret Lawson, arrived at my home carrying several confidential files and smiled before placing the top folder in front of me because she knew the coincidence would leave me speechless for at least a few moments. Vanessa had officially been recommended for partnership, and because her compensation package exceeded a certain financial threshold, the proposal required approval from the firm's principal investors, meaning the final authorization would not become official until I reviewed and signed the documents resting on my kitchen table. I leaned back in my chair, laughed softly at the unbelievable twist life had arranged without any help from me, and carefully read every page before signing my approval without changing a single number or adding even the smallest condition. My decision was simple because I believed Vanessa had earned her promotion through years of dedication, and I refused to let my private feelings interfere with a professional achievement that represented countless nights of sacrifice and determination. A few days later, Nathan called and warmly invited me to the celebration they planned to host at their new home, explaining that friends, senior attorneys, clients, and several important business leaders would be attending to honor Vanessa's remarkable accomplishments. Although I sensed that the invitation came more from my son than from his wife, I happily accepted, prepared my late husband's favorite homemade baked pasta recipe, and carefully wrapped the dish before driving across town in the same dependable sedan I had owned for more than a decade. When I arrived at the beautifully decorated house, expensive luxury vehicles lined the driveway, elegant music drifted through the open doorway, and a young associate mistakenly assumed I was part of the catering staff because of my simple dress and practical shoes instead of the designer clothing worn by the other guests. He quickly apologized after learning I was Nathan's mother, but the awkward moment quietly reminded me that appearances often become the foundation of unfair judgments long before anyone takes the time to discover the truth hidden beneath them. Inside the house, I found Vanessa surrounded by smiling coworkers who praised her remarkable career while crystal glasses sparkled beneath elegant chandeliers. And for a brief moment, I hoped the evening might become a fresh beginning for our relationship instead of another uncomfortable family gathering. She greeted me with a practiced smile, accepted the homemade meal I had prepared with obvious reluctance, and quietly whispered that I should remain near the dining area because several influential guests would not understand my simple background. Rather than arguing, I thanked her for inviting me, wished her sincere congratulations, stepped aside so she could continue entertaining her guests, reminding myself that my son's happiness mattered far more than my wounded pride. Nathan checked on me several times throughout the evening with genuine concern, but he remained busy introducing visitors and serving refreshments, completely unaware that every polite smile on my face was hiding the disappointment growing heavier inside my heart. Later that evening, while waiting outside the hallway near the guest restroom, an older couple approached me with surprised expressions. Before the gentleman suddenly recognized me from a commercial redevelopment project we had completed together years earlier through one of my investment companies. His cheerful greeting carried across the room as he warmly thanked me for helping save his family business during difficult times. And several attorneys nearby turned their attention toward us after hearing him address me by my full name with unmistakable respect. Vanessa quickly walked over with visible concern, attempting to redirect the conversation before anyone asked too many questions. But the gentleman enthusiastically mentioned that my investment group owned several landmark office buildings and had supported numerous businesses throughout the state for decades. Confused expressions spread across the room as guests began connecting details they had never considered before, and I could almost see Vanessa realizing that the quiet woman she had underestimated for years was someone she had never truly known. Instead of accepting Vanessa laughed nervously and dismissed the conversation by describing me as an elderly relative who enjoyed telling charming stories, then turned toward Nathan and demanded that he escort me outside before I embarrassed her any further in front of the distinguished guests. A deep silence settled over the room as I calmly placed my glass on the marble countertop, looked at my son with gentle eyes filled more with sadness than anger, and walked through the front door without raising my voice because I knew the truth would soon speak far louder than I ever could. The following morning, I invited Nathan to my home for a private conversation and asked my attorney, Margaret, to join us, with several confidential folders that had remained locked away for years because the time had finally come to reveal everything I had protected in silence. I carefully explained the history of the business his father and I had built together, showed him documents proving that I owned dozens of commercial properties, along with a controlling investment in the law firm where Vanessa had just become a partner, and watched disbelief slowly give way to tears as he realized how much I had sacrificed to let him build a life based on effort instead of inherited wealth. Nathan apologized over and over for failing to recognize how deeply Vanessa had hurt me, but I assured him that my purpose was never to destroy his marriage or interfere with his family's future because I wanted understanding instead of revenge. Even so, I instructed my attorney to strengthen the legal protections surrounding my estate, remove Vanessa from any direct inheritance, establish a secure educational trust for my granddaughter, Lily, and ensure that every asset intended for Nathan would remain protected for him and his daughter, regardless of what happened in the years ahead. Early the next morning, Vanessa arrived at my front door looking exhausted, carrying Lily in her arms and wearing none of the confidence that had defined her only days before, and she quietly admitted that learning the truth had forced her to confront the painful arrogance that had slowly taken control of her character. Through tears, she confessed that she had spent years measuring people by their homes, clothing, and social status instead of their kindness. And she asked whether forgiveness was still possible after causing so much unnecessary pain to someone who had never stopped supporting her family. I welcomed her inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, and explained that genuine forgiveness could never erase the past, but it could become the first step toward building a better future if it was followed by humility, honesty, and lasting change instead of empty promises. Over the following months, she worked tirelessly to rebuild my trust through consistent actions rather than dramatic words. And although our relationship would never return to complete